get into this episode proper, I want to say a few things. One, that episode 1 of Duel Monsters, as you can see by the title, is a mix match of 2 arcs in the first 59 chapters of the manga. So it won't be an entirely fair comparison. A lot of Duelist Kingdom references moments from before the Duelist portion, so this will be a very hectic arc to compare up until episode 16 or so. And 2, I think an introduction to the main characters before we begin would be the best idea for those who don't know their manga or anime counterparts. Up first, we have Yugimoto, a very shy and timid 14-year-old boy who has solved the Millennium Puzzle, which granted him the wish of friends and to become his alter ego, Yami Yugi, or Dark Yugi, whichever one you prefer. He didn't wish to become Dark Yugi, it just kind of happened. Yami Yugi usually gets revenge on the people who has wronged Yugi or his friends by playing the Dark Game. The game is made to show a person's true self, whether to show if someone is a bad person generally, and giving them punishments accordingly. In the beginning, the games are usually rigged when he himself initiates the game for the above-mentioned reasons. Then we have Katsuya Jonochi, Yugi's best friend, and in the early parts of the manga gets into a lot of fights. He usually solves problems with violence, but is probably the most wholesome, good-hearted character in the manga, as you see when we kind of go through and make comparisons. You have Anzu next, Yugi's longtime friend slash crush, who, unlike her anime counterpart, actually does things in the manga. She's sassy and really doesn't take any crap and isn't annoying. Then you have Honda. Honda. He doesn't do much in the manga. He shows up in chapter 1. He's friends with Jonochi. He shows up in a later chapter when he wants to woo a girl, and then he just randomly shows up in Death Tea to help Yugi. He's kind of a lesser Jonochi, but he really doesn't have any personality other than that. Finally, you have Bakura, who I consider to be a part of the main cast in Duelist because in the manga he arrives with them at the very beginning. He was possessed by an evil spirit who was the final antagonist of the original 59 chapters of the manga. Unlike Honda, there's an actual reason to why he hangs out with the main crew. So now, with that all out of the way, you kind of know what the characters are about and who they are and who the relationships are. We can get started. I'll start off by giving a summary of the manga since it came first. So, we're going to be covering Yugioh, chapters 9 and 10, the Fanged Cards, part 1 and 2, and chapters 36 to 39, which is the Death Tea arc. So in the manga, we start off in the game shop where Anzu, Jonochi, and Yugi, and Grandpa are talking about this new game of Duel Monsters, originally known as Wizards and Magic, that's big in America. It was originally a Magic the Gathering homage, and then it turned into its own thing later on, as we all know. Whilst talking about Duel Monsters, Yugi brings up that Grandpa has a very powerful card, and Grandpa, being the cheeky guy that he is, has no problem showing it off. It is the Blue Eyes White Dragon. Suddenly, Kaiba arrives in the shop. In this version, Kaiba and Yugi know each other from school, and he seems relatively nice, but he is a bit of a card game snob when Jonochi asks him to play and look at his cards, and he just tosses them across the room, essentially. Kaiba sees the Blue Eyes White Dragon and offers to trade and buy the card, but Grandpa refuses. Kaiba walks off angrily. And then we cut to the boys playing Duel Monsters in school, and Kaiba wants to look at the Blue Eyes again. And Yugi happily says yes, since his grandpa let him bring the card to school to share with all of his friends. But Kaiba replaces it with a fake. Yugi notices, but he doesn't say anything until after school. This is why I like Yugi. He's a nice guy. He's very naive, but he's actually very smart at the same time. He notices small things, and he won't confront somebody until they're alone, which I think is really nice, which I think is kind of a good sentiment to have. After school, Yugi asks Kaiba to give the card back due to the sentimentality of the card being given to him by an old friend, and Yugi takes a briefcase to the face after he says that. Yugi gets beaten up a lot in the manga, and Kaiba proclaims that sentimentality isn't a big deal and winning is the only thing that matters, thus triggering Yami Yugi. And then they play Duel Monsters. I am not going to commentate on the game and go through the whole play-by-play because at least in the original first 2 arcs where they play Duel Monsters, anything goes. Really anything goes. It's kind of like a tabletop RPG where you place cards on the board, and considering where you place them on the board, it's a whole thing. It's nothing like what the card game is now, and the rules don't really get revised to the quote-unquote modern Yu-Gi-Oh! That we know until Battle City. But long story short, Yugi actually beats Kaiba with the Blue Eyes White Dragon due to using Monster Reborn. So Kaiba receives a penalty game. The loser of any dark game receives a penalty by the winner. And thus, a few chapters later, kicks off Death Tea. Oh boy, where do I start with Death Tea? Death Tea is a series of floors filled with traps, assassins, and serial killers meant to kill Yugi and his friends. Meant to kill Yugi and his friends. All for revenge for Yami Yugi giving him that penalty game. But before Death Tea kicks off, Kaiba brings Yugi and Jinochi to his home. And then the next morning after, the two are brought to Death Tea and Kaiba challenges Grandpa to a duel and shows that he is now in possession of 3 Blue Eyes White Dragons. Grandpa loses and is given a penalty game, and in order to stop this penalty game, Kaiba forces Yugi to agree to participate in Death Tea. As Yugi and Jinochi goes through Death Tea, they meet Anzu and Honda along the way. Long story short, now this isn't a Death Tea summary, so Yugi beats all 5 floors and gets to Kaiba, where they have their duel. This is the Exodia duel from the first episode of Duel Monsters, and we see how Kaiba comes across the 3 Blue Eyes cards. He kills, bankrupts, and drives people to suicide in order to get them. Yeah. Yugi wins again and gives Kaiba another penalty game, where he shatters Kaiba's heart and leaves him in a catatonic state. Kaiba will have to reassemble the broken pieces of his heart before he can awake. And that's all adapted into Duel Monsters Episode 1. So, Duel Monsters Episode 1. The anime starts off mirroring the scene in the manga, where Kaiba walks in the gang playing Duel Monsters in school. After Yugi beats Jinochi, Jinochi talks about how Yugi has lots of powerful cards. And that's actually how the Blue Eyes comes up in conversation in the anime. And Kaiba overhears them. Kaiba is their classmate, but I don't think they know it. It's not implied that they know each other that well. It's not implied that they talk throughout school. So yeah, the same beats are hit, and the differences aren't major in the card shop. Kaiba wants it, Grandpa refuses. Kaiba in the manga is a lot more slimy and a lot more entitled, and in the anime he seems a bit more reserved and calculating. He seems like an angry, driven guy more than like a slimy guy who would swap out a card for a fake. Kaiba, like in the manga, kidnaps Grandpa and forces him to duel. We don't actually see the duel in the anime. Probably for the surprise factor of seeing that Kaiba also has 3 Blue Eyes. Episode ends with Kaiba receiving a penalty game, but in the anime he's not left catatonic. We also foreshadow Pegasus leading into Chapter 1 of Duelist and Episode 2 of Duel Monsters. Whew, okay, that was a lot. So, which do I prefer? As I said at the beginning, it's not a fair comparison at all. It's like 8 to 10 chapters compared to 20 minutes of animation. I skimmed over a lot in the manga just to have it digestible, just so I can get through it fairly quickly and hit the major plot points. I do prefer the manga due to the charm and the age of the material, and of course it's a full story arc rather than it being condensed into 20 minutes. Kaiba is a lot eviler in the manga. He's a much more terrible person. He tried to kill these people over a card game. In the anime, he's just a dick. He's a richer character in the manga, I feel, and our main cast is actually, considering what he's done, is way nicer in the manga also. So that was my comparison. I hope you liked it. I hope it wasn't too fast, and I hope I didn't skim over anything super important. There's a lot of details that I did leave out, but it was just minor, like the Death Tea games themselves, which really had no plot in Duel Monsters at all. I was kind of just hitting the same plot points and giving you context on why these things were happening. So I'd like to thank you again for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. See you later.